Great. Let's get going here. We have a lot of people in the webinar already. We have 170 people registered. I would love everybody to introduce themselves in the chat if you can, as I'm going to go through the content. And then welcome my colleague Kalungi CMO is also going to help moderate. And then we'll have time for some Q&A at the end of the session. Let's jump in. 3 pillars of qualified pipeline generation in B2B SaaS. So this is normally a full hour session in the Kalungi T2D3 Masterclass, and we're going to do a 15 to 20 minute version of that today, which then allows us to have some interaction as well. Let's dive in. So when you are starting an early stage B2B SaaS company, or you're well on your way on the journey that we'd like to call the T2D3 journey, going from an idea to get your idea tested, get to MVP, minimum viable product, by sort of confirming the pain, getting people to vote with their time, right? Use your software, use your product, give your feedback. And then get to product market fit, where you're not just testing the idea, but you're testing the market viability, right? You get people to vote with their wallet, to vote with their feet, right? If you take it away, they complain, they pay you and they stay, right? That's our sort of most simple definition of product market fit. And then, of course, most of us want to scale after that, right? Once you've hit product market fit, you ask yourself, how do I get this to become a really category leading success, right? And you get to define that category so you can really focus on what we call T2D3 growth, which is a form of scaling your growth beyond just confirming product market fit. You need to build a flywheel. You need people to still pay and stay, but now also say so to others, right? To build some form of sustainable scalability. So that's what we'll talk about today, and what that looks like in 2026, right? The world is changing all the time. There's a lot of new things that will impact how you go to market. One of the things will not change is that your go-to-market model ideally is very compatible with the type of clients that you're trying to serve. And there's many ways to frame this, but one of the most useful and also simple models that we've always found is to think about the size of your average customer. And you can count that in many ways. You see on the x-axis here, you see terms like ARPU, annual revenue per unit, or usually unit is used as user, could be customer, could be device, ARPU, or ACV, annual contract value, or ASP, average sales price, right? All those are just ways to describe the size of a typical client that you have. And that's the x-axis here, and then on the y-axis, we talk about kind of the type of go-to-market that you can afford. And sales involvement is just one of the ways to think about that. But it's mostly about how do you marry the size of your typical client with the customer acquisition cost that you're able to invest in getting those clients. And very simplified, but there's basically 3 main models, right? You either don't invest in marketing and sales, or not a lot, and then that's often called product-led growth, right? Where you have a product that has such great product market fit and usability fit, where people see the value relatively quick after they use the product. So these users will tell others about that. It is relatively easy for those new users to onboard, to start getting that value out of the product. And then you can build a flywheel through a product-led growth model, where you don't really have to invest in marketing channels, in driving awareness through content or through campaigns, and you kind of build an engine that's relatively self-sustaining. That works really well with relatively smaller buyer decision cycles, right? If you have multiple people having to be part of a decision, which is usually the case in B2B, or the size of the decision grows, then it sometimes needs more marketing and sales involvement. And that's how you go up to the upper right corner, right through first marketing and service-led growth models, which means you are actually investing in sales channels, in marketing channels, in customer success channels. If you have a real enterprise sales force, you get all the way to the upper right corner, where you can afford maybe to have really expensive sales journeys, right? Multiple meetings, doing deep demos, building custom proposals, answering RFPs. That works really well if your clients are 100K ACV or up, right? Relatively large deal sizes. And if you're kind of in the middle there, both marketing and customer success or services approaches to grow have a more scaling ability, right? If you can market once and do it really well and touch a lot more prospects. You can do customer success in a way that scales really well, where your customer success team using content and using nurturing and using very highly effective and sometimes automated onboarding can also drive a lot of growth. So in the middle, you find marketing and service-led growth, which is a little more scalable than sales-led growth. And then back to the bottom left is where you have a non-sales, non-marketing way to grow through product-led growth. So, but we start with kind of saying, hey, where are we on the spectrum so that our go-to-market strategy and tactics fit what we can afford based on the client size that we have. And it doesn't mean that sometimes you cannot afford to do marketing-led growth or sales-led growth to get going, even if your unit economics will not sustain that long term. It might be a good idea to do this to grab some market share, for example, as long as you know that you'll have to get to, for example, product-led growth over time if your ACV is not more than, say, $1,000 per year. Okay, so today we're going to focus a little more on the marketing-led and sales-led growth way of coming out of that MVP stage, which is usually driven by founder-led growth, right? Where you do the selling yourself, where you have maybe a couple people in the team, including the people who built the product, be your sales and marketing team, right? And that's very powerful. It can get you absolutely over the MVP hump and sometimes to product market fit, but it's really hard to scale, right? Word of mouth and events and networking is relatively expensive if you don't add systems to it, if you don't add scalable capability to that model. And that's what a lot of companies did that are being used to describe the T2D3 sort of scaling journey, right? These examples are, of course, a little older, but all these companies basically had in common that they hit tripling their ARR 2 years in a row and then doubling the ARR a couple more years, 3 years in the sort of T2D3 acronym version. And what you find is that after you get to product market, you can get to product market fit relatively. Not easy is the wrong word, but you can do it in a relatively one-dimensional way, right? A lot of companies can get to a couple million ARR, sometimes even over 10 million ARR, by having one demand gen channel that works really well. It could be driven by a couple pieces of content, a TED talk, right? It could be something that you did, a certain thing that the product is able to do, a certain partnership, you unleashed a really good paid channel that works for you, a partnership. And that really gets you to product market fit. But if you have to grow beyond that, and T2D3 is about that scaling up, you have to now grow all your unit economics at the same time. You have to diversify your MQL sources, right? Where does your marketing effort lead to top of funnel contribution in multiple channels? All those have to be affordable, right? You cannot just buy your way into the market anymore. That doesn't scale. So your MQLs have to come in at the right cost. And they have to convert to customers, of course, faster and at a higher conversion rate. So you have to optimize conversions. You have to optimize ARPU, expand the average or annual revenue per unit. ARPU expansion times conversion times MQLs that are not going to break the bank. All those things together will drive top line growth. And then, of course, unless those customers stay with you, that is basically your growth formula, right? So churn is the last thing that you, of course, now have to start really paying attention to, because if you add constantly new customers to your business, but you lose them faster than you can add, that doesn't scale very well either. So the essence of getting from MVP to product market fit and now to T2D3 growth is that your team has to learn how to do all these things at the same time. And that's the system that we talk about. When you want to go from having a singular funnel that might have gotten you to product market fit to the flywheel that you need to drive high scale growth, it is more and more important that the foundation of your go-to market is extremely strong. And that starts with clear ICP, ideal customer profile, and positioning. But then it goes into kind of how do you really build a value first funnels and then learn from every interaction that you have with the market, with a prospect, with a customer, with a prospect that doesn't convert, right? When you learn something you can't lose, right? So if people don't convert, what do you learn from that? What is the content that did not work? What is the channel that did not get the performance like the other channels? And that feedback loop will really help you build that flywheel. So a little bit of a sort of a priority comment here. You need to do three things to win a market. You need to execute really well. You need to do that by having the right offer for the market where you've hit product market fit. That offer has to allow you to scale. It needs to fit what the people that you're trying to service are looking for. But that, of course, only works if you are in the right market. So, and a lot of early stage companies, especially when they get funded or when you get your first little bit of profitability, you're able to spend that on marketing, to reinvest it in the business, they make the mistake of over focusing on execution without actually first making sure that you have the right offer and that you're actually in the right market. So that's really the sequence, right? Make sure that the market that you're in is really craving for your solution. They have the real pain that you have discovered. They have the fears and dreams that will make them click on the emails that you send them, or the advertising that you do, or the content that you produce, because they actually it resonates with them, right? They have the pain that you are solving for. So you have to be in the right market, and then of course you need to have the right offer. But if you're in the wrong market with the right offer, it doesn't go very long, right? So you have to do it in that sequence. And then once you have the right offer for the right market, of course, execution optimization is the next order of business, and that's what you sort of can then frame as: how do I build pipeline? How do I make sure that pipeline is qualified, that pipeline is really going to turn into good customers? A quick pause here. If you are interested, Kalungi is offering a free T2D3 growth workshop where we will build your custom go-to-market plan with you. You will work with one of our CMOs, and we'll do a quick audit with you of how you're kind of growing today, where you may have got stuck. Will help you identify what has worked for you, what part of the market seems to be the most viable, and then help you build that execution plan. So look at your market, understand what you're offering, and then help you maybe optimize the way you're executing to drive that growth. And use the QR code or go to the URL kalungi.com/workshop to find out more. So where do we start? Getting a good ideal customer profile is easier said than done. A lot of ICPs, they get stuck at: this is the size of the typical client, this is the industry they're in, this is maybe the type of people they employ, these are the type of problems they face, these are the challenges that maybe are happening in their industry, a policy climate, etc. And that is no longer enough, right? Because all your competitors, everybody can build an ICP like that relatively easy. You use a little bit of NLM or AI research, you do a little bit of content scanning of what your competitors are doing versus what you're doing. And it's not really hard to come up with an ICP of the quality that I just described. That's not going to be enough. Today, I think going beyond that and understanding within that ICP what are the jobs to be done by both the company and the personas, what are the things that are really scaring them, is really critical. And you do that by going really deep into what's called who's it for and what their jobs to be done are. And then you have to do positioning, right? And so we frame that as both who's it for and what's it for. And you can start with either question. What I found is usually the easiest is when you're still in MVP state, you have basically convinced yourself that there's a problem that's worth solving. And if you haven't hit product market fit yet, maybe start at what's it for, right? What is the problem that you're really solving for? What's the pain that is really creating that urgency, and how, of course, are you addressing that? And are you able to be a aspirin instead of just a vitamin? If you actually have hit product market fit, if you have enough clients that are already paying you and they stay, then you can answer the question, who is it for? Right now you have a lot more data to be very precise in who is it exactly that finds the most value in your solution. And how do we do that? We start with thinking about what's called the SAM, the serviceable addressable part of the market. When you have a TAM, the total addressable market, that can be very deceiving, right? The total addressable market is absolutely not your market. The part of the market that you can realistically service is really the SAM. So that's the first thing you do. You want to make sure that you're very honest with yourself on sort of, hey, there's certain parts of the world, certain types of clients, certain size, certain language they speak, maybe certain capabilities they need that we are just not going to be able to service or service very well. So you cut that out, and now you're at the SAM, the serviceable part of that addressable market. But what you now really want to do is understand what part of that market have we already penetrated, where we have an actual beachhead. And the way to do that is think about your existing clients and look at the type of clients that fit the criteria that you use to define your serviceable addressable market. And you kind of look at, maybe there's different groupings of customers, maybe you have different subsegments, different industries, different capabilities that they're interested in. And you divide the amount of clients that you actually have that use that capability that you offer, that are really a good fit for that part of your SAM, by the actual size of that sub market. That's how you kind of rank the beachheads that you have. And then we add sort of how easy it would be to grow. And let me visualize that a little bit. So let's say you sell a solution that is for healthcare, a health technology solution, for example. You could have a segmentation of that market. When you think of the TAM being all of healthcare, you could have a segmentation of that market that's more about the healthcare disciplines, right? The type of providers. Because if you're selling a solution that they all need something around, for example, insurance compliance checking, right? Some software that helps you with getting your patients registered and built correctly with the right insurance plan. It's something that is applicable to every provider in healthcare. You could look at a total addressable market that's relatively large, that has all these sub-disciplines, but you probably don't have a strong position in all of these. You might have really these beachheads in some of these. And so think about a beachhead as a position of strength where you've established a presence with customers that pay you, that stay, that like you, that you may have had some references, you have some quotes. You're learning from those clients, so you're using that to actually improve your product. It makes you actually constantly stronger versus your competition, because you have the unique access to customers who are already using your product to make your product stronger. It allows you to really dominate that subsegment of the market. Once you have that beachhead, you can really protect it. And just like the Allied forces in the Second World War, it sometimes helps if you have multiple beachheads, that they have some similarity in the type of clients that you are servicing, right? The landings on D-Day didn't happen in Spain and Portugal and France and the Netherlands and Denmark. They all happened relatively close to each other, right? They had multiple beachheads. So that once they started to build out those beachheads and to create more content and improve the product, that some of the things that were needed for each of these parts of the market started to kind of overlap, and it becomes just a lot more efficient. Talking about efficiency, you have to, of course, consider that certain beaches are going to be easier to land on, and then more importantly, to continue inland from, than other beaches, right? If you have a beachhead in a market that's relatively costly, you may want to reconsider building that beachhead out. Like if you were have scored a lot of really good points with a couple of clients, but they're in a very hard part of the market because they have a lot of special needs. They all have individual product requirements that require a lot of your professional services. Then that might not be the beachhead that you really want to double down on. So what you want to do is look at all these beachheads that you have. And I'm using another example. This is a fintech solution, right? A product, software product for the financial services industry. And they might look at the subsegments of the market a little bit like the bubbles that you see here, right? Some maybe credit unions, some saving and loans banks. You could have some investment banks. And these will have different sizes, right? The size of the bubble here is the size of those subsegments in, for example, amount of potential clients or amount of potential revenue. You can pick some form of a size criteria. And then you have to force yourself not to maybe pick the biggest bubble, but to think about what is going to be the easiest path to growth. And there's two dimensions that I consider when you do this. One is, how big is your beachhead? That's the horizontal axis here, right? Find a way to calculate what is your relative share of that subsegment market, right? So if you have 10 clients in, for example, investment banking, and you have 10 clients in the credit union sub vertical, but when you divide that number 10 by the amount of potential clients, that you might say there's 10 clients out of 100,000 investment banks, and there's maybe 10 clients out of 1 million credit union potential users or customers. Then, of course, that ratio is going to be higher for the investment bank. Your amount of penetration is higher, so you have a stronger beachhead. So make sure you find a way to measure your level of penetration vis-a-vis the size of that subsegment. That's the axis. And you see an example here. You could basically say, hey, what is my annual recurring revenue that I'm selling to, for example, small business banks? And I divide that by the total addressable revenue that maybe that small business segment represents, including the part of the market that I don't service yet. That's the x-axis. And then the y-axis is some form of how do you define friction, cost, ability of you to service these clients very well. And this is a little bit subjective, but if you have data around, who of your clients are most satisfied, what is the cost to service them, right? Some of your clients might be much costlier to service than others. Some clients might be easier convinced that this is the perfect solution. They start telling others about it. You have a lot more testimonials, more quotes. So those all are good criteria to use to rank your clients in, and this could be literally a stack rank of all your clients in how easy it is to service them. And if you have 100 clients, it takes a little bit of time, but sit down with your team and almost force yourself to rank them 1 to 100 from the client that is the hardest to service to the client that's the easiest to service. And if you have then also an attribute that you add that is the subsegment that these clients are in, now you have a great model to combine with your actual size of beachheads, the x-axis, to figure out where you could easily start your growth journey and double down on one of those subsegments as your new ideal customer profile. So what's the size of the market? Where are you currently winning? And where can you actually really find a domination strategy to be worth pursuing? So once you've defined that ICP, we call that actually the SOM. So you go from TAM, total addressable market, to the serviceable part of that market that you can realistically service. But that's even often far too big, right? Because you have limited time, you have limited resources. The clock is ticking, right? Especially if you're still being funded by investors. So the SOM is not only the serviceable, but the obtainable part of that market based on limited time and limited resources. And it's actually very good to make that relatively small. You don't want to make it too small so that you cannot achieve your growth goals, but you usually, if you are under 10 million ARR, can make any of these markets relatively small and still really achieve your growth goals if you are able to really dominate, if you are able to have a really compelling value proposition, the best execution. So what you now need to know is, if you've established what your ICP is, what are they really, really starving for, right? What is not just the pain, but what is the pain that is staring them in the face? What are the things that are keeping them up at night? And you often have to go do this at the persona level, right? It's no longer enough to just describe the ICP as an organization or a company with relatively broad attributes, but get now into the skin of the people who make decisions, right? In B2B, you're of course going with personas that are spending someone else's money, so it's a little different than consumer marketing. But these people are still addressing certain pains. They lay awake at night about certain problems. What are the things that are most urgent to them? What can you find out about them when you look at what's written online, what you can find in their annual reports, and of course, most importantly, by interviewing them, right? Use techniques like the why and the how letter. A lot of these techniques, by the way, are in the T2D3 book, right? How do you actually go from having a relatively vanilla ICP definition to getting extremely actionable ICP personas that allow you to create great content, to be very relevant, to make sure you have the right messaging and content for the right stages of the funnel where you meet them, to really get going. So you're identifying the problems that your ICP is dying to solve. You go from a market to a hungry market, to a starving market. What's broken? What's costing them real time? And that allows you to then create content that is really valuable. There's no better time than now with LLMs being able to do the copywriting for you, to do the research for you, to be extremely self-critical and say, what is it that we do that is so special, where we have a more important opinion, we have better content, more experience than anybody else to solve a certain problem? That's the content you want to write about, right? And when you come up with ideas based on questions you're getting from your clients that nobody else has really answered, you get a question that you get maybe every day. type it into Google or in an LLM. And if there's not a great answer, if you can improve on that answer, that's the content you want to build, right? And there's what I found is that most people actually that are selling a B2B SaaS solution can come up with a question like that almost every day. Every day there's almost something that your prospects, your customers are struggling with that you can help them with. That is an opportunity to create really good, valuable content. Content, by the way, along three types of content. I like to have both now content that drives conversion, how content that drives education, that makes you the trusted guide, and wow content that allows people to notice you, to look up. And so wow, how, now. And wow is really useful for driving awareness, right? Making sure you have an opinion, you assert yourself, you take some risk, you say in the market that you're in, things that maybe make people actually feel a little bit uncomfortable or surprised, right? That's wow content. And the moment you get people's attention, you want to build how content. You want to help them now that they think of you as someone who can lead them, who can be the trusted guide. How do you build content that actually is really useful? Utility content, easy checklists, frameworks, templates, etc., playbooks, to then allow them to say, hey, this is not only an important problem for me to think about, you are actually helping me, I can do useful things with the content you provide. And then the last job you have to do is, of course, get them to care enough so that they take action now. And that's the now content, which has to be more about fear of missing out, showing others that have gone before you, quotes, testimonials, interviews, examples of people who have achieved success, showing the data that they've maybe been able to achieve that success with. Because honestly, in B2B SaaS, if you're actually solving a problem that's worth solving, then most people in your market are actually going to be a good fit. They may not be in a buyer's mode yet, right? They may not be searching for your solution, but if you've done a good job identifying an important problem and you have a solution that really solves that problem in the right way, then there might be a larger part of the market, 90% maybe even, who is potentially a really good fit. They just don't know it yet, right? Or they don't know about you yet. And when you are trying to reach them, the worst thing you can do is to try to sell them, right? The 10% you can sell, they're problem aware, they're looking for options, and they're asking themselves, why you, right? And when they're asking you why you, then you can answer why with your claims, with your benefits, all the things that you bring to bear. But if people are not necessarily in that buyer state yet, right? They're not necessarily problem aware. They're definitely not aware of the problem to the extent that they care enough about it to go look for solutions. Now you have to try to meet them where they are. And this is where a lot of marketing falls flat on its face, right? The top row here, what I call demand capture, that's the funnel where people are already looking for a solution, right? So now you can be really optimizing for people who are already problem aware. They may have filled out a form on your website. They may found you organically or through an ad. And now you can have the content that is very convenient, which is talking about yourself, talking about all the things you have to give to them and why it's important for them to buy that, right? That's a very common, well understood way of doing demand capture. Sometimes called demand generation, but it's really not, right? If you're actually just paying for ads or you're building content so that people who are already in market, who are already looking for something and they Google it or they find it in an LLM, they find you, you're not generating that demand, you're just capturing it, you're channeling it towards you. Real demand creation is when you actually can find people in the market that you are actually specialized in, the beachhead that you've built, and find them in a way that they're willing to look up, to notice you, and they're willing to listen to the content you have to offer because it's valuable to them. It's not about you. That content is not about your capabilities, it's not about your claims, it's about them. It's about helping them on their journey, whatever that journey looks like. And if you do that well, it will take a little longer, but the moment they're ready to kind of consider solving for the problem, then of course you will be the first person they might call. And that's how kind of account-based marketing and really good content marketing and knocking on the right doors really works. And that's what we like to call demand creation. You have to solve for the problems, the challenges that your clients have before you're trying to sell them, right? And here's a small kind of recap of that. You start with their challenges. You really want to speak towards their fears and dreams. I love to use Maslow's pyramid of needs to think about what are people in certain roles really looking for to find, for example, social recognition, to find emotional satisfaction, to find uh, engagement, interest in their jobs because they're learning something new, or because they're being seen as someone who helps their company succeed, right? That all goes into that second box. And then you lead with outcomes. You don't lead with all the capabilities that you have, but what those things enable, right? The outcomes that your customers were able to achieve based on the things you did. And then before you ask people to fill out a form or to come to your event, you want to make sure that they really trust you, right? That you've not necessarily burned that trust by not creating valuable content. So lastly, the summary of all this is that your reputation is the most valuable thing you have. And your reputation, which is another way of saying that you become that trusted guide, is a function of these three things, right? You have to have relevant content that is not just nice to have, but it addresses a real need, a real pain, a pain that is also relatively urgent, right? You want to go after that hungry part of the market part that is starving for your solution. You have to be, of course, a credible, trusted guide. You prove that by the content that you provide, maybe by the third-party um, 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 endorsements that you have, quotes, testimonials, etc. And then, of course, you need to convey that what you do has real utility value, that it's easy for them to envision themselves using your solution to help them. That's not going to be a really high lift, right? The three things that are really important when you want someone to consider you. Well, the four things. First, you have to be in a market that is, of course, that is the market where the pain that you solve for actually exists. But then you have to have an offer that is not only giving them a real clear outcome where their dreams can be satisfied, but they can also they can visualize that that dream will actually be realized at a relatively short interval, right? When they engage you, they can see that the problem will be solved in a relatively timely fashion without them having to do a huge amount of work, right? Friction, make the friction low. And then the credibility goes back to that you also want to have a very high likelihood for them to believe that if they pick your solution, it will actually work. And all this kind of is setting you up to have a really good offer. So an offer is kind of those four things, right? Having a dream outcome that is likely to actually be be realized for a relatively low cost in a relatively believable time frame, right? It can happen relatively fast. I don't have to do too much work. I can see that this will probably work out, right? The likelihood for it to happen. And it is actually the outcome that I want. That's a great offer. So if you're in the right market and you have the right offer, now you're ready to really optimize your execution. And execution is all about learning. If you learn, you can't lose, right? Anything that happens in your funnel that leads to someone not necessarily converting to the next stage is an opportunity for you to learn. So whether it's in the awareness stage where you're building content and you can test what is sort of getting people's attention, where do I actually understand their pain, whether I understand what really they care about, all the way to interest and consideration. What are the things that we do that resonate with them, that make people confirm that this is something that they would find valuable, ideally with of course, by buying your solution, by paying and staying, but sometimes also just by confirming it, by verbal confirmation, by the type of testimonials you get, the quotes you get. And then, of course, ultimately that has to convert into signups, into dollars, into ARPU, into sustainable recurring revenue. And at all these stages of the funnel, if you have the right offer and you're in the right market, the only thing you really now have to do is to force yourself to constantly learn. And whether that is by doing an A/B test, or whether that is by making sure when things don't make it from the market into the sales funnel or through the sales funnel to a win, that you always capture the reasons why. And if you don't understand why, go find out. Make a huge effort to understand what was it that was not good enough, that was not resonating, that was not timely, that was not maybe helping your champion to sell it internally in their organization. Because if you learn, and especially when you have that beachhead where you now have this unique ability to learn from the customers that you already have, that's your competitive advantage. And I've seen a lot of companies that have this advantage. They have a beachhead to really fail to use that unique signal that they get from the people that are in their funnel that are sometimes falling out, to then learn from that and make that beachhead even stronger. So that's what we mean with pipeline feedback loops. So you got to go through sort of this circle many, many times to understand, okay, I have an ICP, I'm starting to talk with these people, I'm learning from that. Some of these will lead to deals, some of them will not. That's signal, that's insight, and that can help me also make my ICP more precise. So when we want to kind of turn this into kind of a call to action for you, we kind of want to make sure you actually get real learnings, right? Instead of just collecting the feedback, do something with that. Interpret the outcomes. I love to record every sales call, every interaction we have with clients, because especially now with LLMs and AI, it's so easy to turn those conversations into insights, into improving your content. If you have a lack of ideas for blogs to publish, just scan all your sales conversations and ask an LLM, what are the pain points, the problems that our prospects bring up? And how can we, with our value proposition, make much more meaningful content to help them than the content that already exists? So that's how you build this marketing engine. And when you start optimizing this way and your ICP gets better, your messaging gets more precise, your offer gets more compelling, that's how you can really drive scalable growth. A lot of this, again, is also addressed in the T2D3 book, where the very specific mechanics on how do you build a good ICP, solid personas. We have a specific methodology with P1, P2, P3, where you break your personas to align with the customer journey to make sure you are able then to create really good content and messaging that then helps you refine your content, your ICP, etc., using the feedback from sales. I've gone a little fast. We have time for some questions. One more time, that we have an offer. If you want to do a go-to-market workshop with us, completely free, we'll help you audit your go-to-market, your existing go-to-market plan and your motions, identify where you have the quickest growth opportunities, and then give you some ideas on how to start executing on that. With that, thank you for your time. I think most of you actually have stayed in the webinar. We started with 45. I still see 39. That's really helpful. I hope this was useful. Welcome. Do we have a couple of questions? Yes, the content will absolutely be made available. We'll send everybody the presentation and the recording. Oh, it's a great question. Someone asks, I have the book, and are we working on helping our audience with some AI prompts, etc.? We actually, so Kalungi has a full service offering where you can let us do marketing for you. But we created something new. The book is called Syntropy, and we have a new offering. Syntropy stands for it's the opposite of entropy. And what happens when people use AI, it sometimes creates just more noise, right? More iterations of things that don't add a lot of value. And Syntropy in the book is also really describing this well, is about how do you do marketing in the age of AI by optimizing your signal quality. And we do have a lot of ability. We have a whole playbook and content to actually help you do this yourself with certain prompts, with another version of our playbook that's really geared towards you doing a lot of this with the help of AI, so that you don't have to outsource the problem completely to Kalungi, but you can actually do a lot of this yourself, in addition to just buying a book and reading it, of course. But yes, we do have a lot of that content. So the workshop is, it actually is built on this Syntropy playbook that we have, this kind of boiled down version of the larger Kalungi playbook. The larger Kalungi playbook, by the way, is an Asana with 1,300 rows with everything that a B2B SaaS company needs to do in its first 4 or 5 years of building their go-to-market. And with Syntropy, we've really boiled that down to the essence of how do you build your ICP, the personas, etc., using AI for that. And in this go-to-market workshop, we'll introduce you to that methodology, but we'll also will work with you through kind of what would be the best way for you to get started. Where are you being blocked? What is really missing? And give you a relatively custom plan to, after that workshop, to either go execute yourself, or if you need some help, we could help with some coaching for that as well. How to use AI to stand up these pillars. I think AI is a great tool to take away any excuses to get to a much higher level of quality of both your research, the quality of your content, the quality of your targeting, everything that you do with your human superpowers, right? Doing a great interview with your clients, for example, can now be amplified by both combining that with more research and testing your ideas, etc., but then also turning that into really good content, right? Where you may have not been able to write some of this yourself, you didn't maybe have budget for copywriters, etc. Now you're really only in charge of getting the real ideas, right? The things that really help your customers, the unique knowledge that you bring, but you can use AI now to turn that into content relatively quickly. So you can test it with your audience. You can see what people actually react to, what resonates with them, and that's now cheaper than ever, right? So I think whether it's the ICP, the personas, the positioning, what's it for, who's it for, turning that into campaigns and execution, AI helps with all those pillars. And again, we have some content to help with that as well. But I would say if you don't use AI for all of this, you're really you're falling back. I use a model with my team where you have two axes. One is how easy is it to do certain work with AI now, and the other axis is how important is the work. And I force everybody to think about what are the top 10 things where you spend your time. And whether you're a designer or a writer or a project manager or a CMO, it applies to all these roles. And you let people write down those 10 things that they do in their day-to-day job, and you ask them to rate those things both on how important is this work, what's the value of the outcome of this work, and how easy is it for you to envision that being done by AI. And you rank it like that, you build basically a 2x2 matrix. And now there will be things in the quadrant that is, it's not that important that it can be done by AI, so stop doing those things. But there might be things that are really important that can be done by AI. And there are things that cannot be done by AI that really are important, like doing a live webinar. We do a lot of these things live now because AI cannot do that, right? And we see a lot of success with live work, even in-person events, because those are harder to copy by everybody else. We are a startup right now at product market fit. 6 clients. I think 6 is still a relatively low number. If these are relatively large clients who spend a lot of money with you, then that absolutely counts as product market fit. Product market fit about 15 years ago when I started in marketing was more like, oh, you need 1,000 clients that pay you, right? That's no longer needed. If you have 5 or 6 clients who not only pay you, but they've paid you ongoing, right? They stay, and they have actually maybe told others about it, that's product market fit, right? That's definitely enough to say, hey, I've built out a beachhead. So what you have with 6 clients is gold, right? There's if you don't use these clients to learn from them, to let them help you make your product better, your solution, to give you feedback, you're missing out probably on the most valuable asset you have. So in that sense, it is good for you to start having a real go-to-market plan. How do you really get the learnings from these clients, right? How do you make sure you use them to build your next set of clients? How do you use them to confirm what type of clients you need to find more of? So 6 clients is enough to really get serious about some kind of go-to-market plan. So the workshop would be a great start for that. But of course, if these clients are people who pay you $10 per month, then maybe you have not reached product market fit yet. And I would consider staying a little more longer in sort of, hey, how do we get really from MVP to getting a lot more clients to actually give us their money? Yeah, interesting. HubSpot has long been the go-to tool set for early stage companies because it's a really comprehensive tool set. It's easy to learn. You don't get all the friction that you get when you have to tie Marketo to Salesforce to another CRM that you're using for customer success. And HubSpot basically had all that in one box, and they still do. And I think it's still the go-to choice if you don't have anything. I've actually been wondering the last 5, 6 years why there hasn't been another CRM to kind of come up that is a little more AI centric, that is a little more where the CRM modules between marketing and sales and customer success don't feel so much still as different products, right? In HubSpot, it's really you have these different hubs. You have the marketing hub, the sales hub, the CRM, the customer success hub. And it honestly doesn't make a lot of sense to me because you all need all three, right? It's like having an accounting system where you would have a different hub for accounts receivable, accounts payable, and your general ledger. So I'm actually looking forward to HubSpot either improving that or coming up with some alternatives. But the reality is today, HubSpot is still probably the best bet for B2B SaaS. So if you want to broaden your horizon with multiple ICPs, you have to be careful that you, in the end, you can only prioritize one thing at a time, right? So if you have multiple subsegments where you feel you have a strong beachhead, it still is very helpful to say which of those is my idealist customer profile, right? Because when you get to work in the morning at 8 a.m., or you have a content marketer who needs to decide what blog to write or what campaign to run, they can only pick one of your ICPs. So even if you have multiple, having them ranked in order of priority for you, I think is very important. And a lot of companies struggle with that because they're really, nervous about shutting a certain door and saying, hey, I got these 5 markets where I have traction and I don't want to forget about any of them. And I need to go work for all 5 because otherwise I might lose that opportunity. And the reality is that you can do all 5 in sequence instead of in parallel and probably be faster. So if you have 6 months, maybe do 1 month for each ICP instead of trying to start with all 5 at the same time or all 6. I don't know. AI agents is a word that's, of course, being used all over the place for many different ways of either automating or replacing someone doing a certain job. What I find in the last 2 years, we've switched so much between using Claude for writing, using ChatGPT for research, using first Google Gemini, but now Notebook LMs for a lot of kind of integrated like marketing planning and running a project with multiple people. And now there's gems. And of course, there's custom GPTs that you can publish if you want to use AI to also interact with your customers, which is the starting point of having agents. I think all these things are still moving so much that betting on a certain type of agent, for example, or a certain brand or type of automation is still tricky. I would encourage you to still keep using a lot of different tools for a lot of different things and constantly learn from that. Um, yeah, that I don't have a lot more to add. There's not like one AI agent model, for example, that I think is ideal for a B2B SaaS company. A double-sided marketplace. I'm going to guess a little bit what Daniel, what you mean with this question. So B2B for us, the main difference between B2C is that you have multiple people involved in the buyer's journey that who spend someone else's money, right? It's not their own money. That's the biggest difference. And that is, of course, leading to having content for different types of personas, to acknowledging that you may have a champion who is, really the right person to target with your value prop, etc. But then they have to be able to convince others. So that's a lot of what is in our methodology. When I think of a double-sided marketplace, you could mean who is your clients serving, right? What are their clients, and how do we make sure that our messaging and our value prop incorporates what's most important for our clients as they have to have a successful business? Or maybe you're talking about sort of the vendor side and maybe a channel. Um, the only thing I would say is that in T2D tree, when you diversify your demand gen, at some point you ask the question, do I go direct? Do I go through a partner model, a channel model, or a combination? And that is a form maybe of a double-sided marketplace. The challenge I always ask for is when people think of a channel or an indirect model, as a cheap way to get sales and marketing resource. Oh, the partners are going to sell on our behalf, going to market on our behalf. The problem with that assumption is that partnerships have to kind of have an equal exchange in value for both parties to care, right? If you're still relatively small and your value prop may not have gotten a lot of traction yet, then chances are that when you start partnering with partners that might be bigger than you, might have more traction than you, that you're going to end up doing all the work anyway. You'll have to help them sell, help them market, build all the materials. So those high ROI unit economics might never materialize until you have found a lot more scale anyway. So, but that's not maybe what your question was about. But when people think of direct versus channel, that's a whole specific trade-off, and we could do a workshop on that, one of these go-to-market workshops. Marketing-led versus sales-led. So I believe that marketing-led is never sustainable long-term. So let me start there. Almost every company that starts with marketing-led growth, buying ads, doing content marketing, running events, all those things that you can do with a great success, especially as a market, as a category is maturing, those will get more expensive over time. At some point, the clicks will get too expensive. If the category matures, there's a lot of competition. The clicks will get expensive. It will get harder and harder to rank high in organic search positions. So the cost of being effective will go up and up and up. And what I find is that in every mature category, the winners are usually the ones who successfully pivoted from marketing-led growth to sales-led growth, and they're now able to command the highest price point. Mystery is margin. They have their best sales force. They're able to pay them well, but they're also able to have like hundreds of thousands of dollars of ACV in the type of clients they attract. And those will, and when you look at all the B2B SaaS darlings of Wall Street the last 10 years, Datadog, Snowflake, all those companies, they all went through that, right? Some of them started really with a marketing-led growth strategy where they bought market share, but they all morphed into sales-led growth as the more sustainable enterprise model with really good unit economics. The other path is to really figure out product-led growth. So every category that matures usually have a sales-led growth winner, and there's sometimes also a product-led growth winner. Another version of solving the same problem at a lower price point, with far less friction, with a very different type of go-to-market product-led growth. And so what you often see is that marketing-led growth only gets you so far, and you have to kind of be ready to optimize either for sales-led growth or product-led growth. And for some companies, they're able to do both, but you have to be ready for marketing-led growth. At some point, you're just going to run out of clicks that you can buy, or they will just get too expensive. This is really good. I think, so ICP has usually two elements. One are the things that are really about the customer, and there's things that are about you, right? If you think of your ICP has to be a good, define a good fit, because the customers that you define as your ideal customer prospects, of course, are able to get the value from what you do. So this is actually more about you. It's more about, okay, I cannot service this type of client, but I can service the other one because our product is only available in a certain language, right? That part, that's about you. Your ICP is defined by your capabilities and your limitations. And then the other side of the ICP is, of course, what customers are actually looking for. And that's when you use things like jobs to be done, right? You define your ICP by the use case, by the problems they're trying to solve for, maybe certain challenges that are actually happening in their specific market segment. And when you do that, then you sometimes have to use industry-specific language because you're talking about their challenges. You need to use their terminology. You need to use certain acronyms, for example. A great example is my book. I did not come up with T2D3. T2D3 was coined in a blog at some point by one of the managing partners at Battery Ventures. And then 8 or 9 years went by, and a lot of VCs and private equity started to use that term to describe high-scale growth. But nobody had actually written anything of any depth on how you actually do that. So I decided to do that with the book. And then I had to come up with the title. And when I decided to call the book T2D3, it goes exactly to this question, because my ICP are people who are in the venture capital stage of growth, right? Early stage, smaller B2B SaaS companies. And for that audience, the term T2D3 was actually usually meaningful. Most of people in my audience could recognize that. And it also meant that a lot of people who did not know what T2D3 meant would not pick up the book, and I thought that was a good thing. So sometimes using industry-specific language can really help you make your ICP feel at home, like you're one of them, right? You get them, and it can also help you filter out people who might not be a good fit. But don't do it unless it's a really meaningful term, right? If it really helps you be either more relevant and increase your reputation, as in you know them, you can be their trusted guide. We've grown to 200 clients this year. I think if your SEO has been so effective, it means you have really good content, right? That's something you could conclude. And if you have really good content, then amplifying that content by making it seen by people who may not see it today, by using, for example, social media amplification, paid or organic, right? And by the way, any form of social media engagement, let's be clear, is always going to cost you money. So if you're not buying an ad or a click, you're buying someone's time to actually make sure that posts go up, right? That you entertain and engage with your audience on a regular basis, right? Because a social media campaign would fall flat on its face if you do it for 3 days and then you stop, right? So both are, of course, investments that you're making. But social media-led inbound marketing for me is extremely viable if you actually think your content is valuable, which in your case, if you've got 200 clients with SEO, might be the case. The other thing to do is webinars like this. If you have really valuable content, then turning that into new versions of that content, I think is a very good use of resources. Or just publish it on multiple channels. Some of it could be nurturing your existing contact list, right? And using it to do all kinds of sort of repetitive touch points. Aligning a product roadmap and know-how. Wow. So if you think of, and I said know-how in this presentation, but I usually say wow, how now in that sequence, like the awareness stage of the funnel, the education or consideration stage of the funnel, and then the conversion stage of the funnel. Wow, how now? If you're thinking of your product evolution, there's usually two inputs that drive product roadmap, right? One is your customers telling you what they need, and the other is you still being in the mode of when you also started your MVP of having a real conviction that a certain problem is worth solving and that you have ideas on how to solve it, right? And being a trusted guide means you have to find a balance between the two. Because if you're just building your product and you're deciding on product priorities based on what your customers tell you, on the one hand, you'll be much better servicing the clients in the segment that you already have a beachhead in, so your product will get better and better and better for that specific segment. But it's also going to be easier and easier for your competitors to copy what you do, unless you also inject some of your own innovation, right? And your own idea. Oh, the customers ask for me to solve this problem in this way, but maybe your team is able to solve it in a much smarter way that is really unique, really special. So your product roadmap has to combine the two. And that's where, of course, the wow content means you're actually asserting yourself. You have an opinion. You do things maybe beyond what customers are asking you for. It's a little more surprising. It's a little more unique. So your ability to build great how content starts with knowing your customers well, what are they asking for, and helping them on that journey. The wow content is more related to the things you're doing in your product innovation that maybe are really special, that nobody else has thought about, some innovation. And then now is all about, of course, making things that people buy, right? I worked at Microsoft for the first half of my career for people like Steve Ballmer. And he had a saying, we always had to sell what we built. Sales shouldn't be complaining that there was a feature missing, right? If you work at a car sales job or selling insurance, there's no way you as a seller could complain about your life insurance product not having the right features, and that's the reason you can't sell it, right? That's why you're being paid, to actually sell things that you have, sell what you build. But then also, of course, product innovation means you're also building what people are asking for, right? So there has to be this two-way street of making sure your sales team is able to sell what you already have, but then you use, of course, the feedback from your customers to make sure you keep building more things that they are looking for. Going to a new market. The first thing is that geographic expansion is always more sexier than it might actually be, especially when you're actually starting in the US market. The market in the US, of course, very large. And it's very tempting to, when your growth is not going as fast as you would like it to go expand beyond US borders. Or if you don't have New York or California figured out yet, to go to other states that are a lot smaller and there's a lot less clients there. So expansion, whether it's geographic or going up or down market, right, going to either larger or smaller clients, expansion to go after other industry segments. I think it's absolutely part of your growth plan, especially if you've done everything on the current beachhead that you can to maximize your position there. Just don't think too lightly about going after a complete new part of the market. I think if you have a really strong beachhead, let's say in your example in Europe, going to the UK, you should only consider that if you feel you've really squeezed everything out of Europe that you can, because building on an existing beachhead is so much easier than trying to open a new one. Hmm. I actually don't know. We use we use everything. One of the examples, when you think of educational content, something that has never been easier is to publish actual books. So this is a book that was published by one of our clients that sells safety solutions. This is higher education, something in the sort of state policy sphere. And so an AI agent is in the end a combination of using multiple AI tools, right? And some of that is for writing, some of that for process automation, some of that is for collecting feedback. I think all these tools are just changing so fast that having the right combination, like I showed those books because those were mostly written by Claude, but then at some point we moved to Gemini. We've definitely used ChatGPT for a lot of the research. And then, of course, my team uses agents and process and all kinds of automation with MCP protocol integration to tie a lot of steps together, right? When you think of creating images, for example, you don't want to have to go to Sora or any other image generator all the time to re-enter your prompt and then download the images and vote on those. You can automate all those things. But I don't have one agent, actually. I used Jasper at some point. I thought it's just an interesting skin, interesting veneer, but actually easier for me to use the NLMs themselves. If you have a strong marketing leader, a strong CMO, I think making sure that you are able to use a lot of these tools is more important than putting it into an agent where you kind of lose all the control over the human superpower that you have to still apply to make the AI fulfill its potential. I think we're at time. Yeah, so last maybe call to action here. If you're interested in getting our go-to-market workshop, scan the QR code or check out the URL kalungi.com/workshop. And we would love to jump on a call with you and do some planning with you together. Thank you everyone for joining, and yeah, feel free to send us some feedback. We would love to learn from what was useful and what we may be able to improve on.